We're going to discuss some players that this offseason is important for, but I think the number one guy is DJ Hicks.
You are Locked On Aggies, your daily podcast on the Texas A&M Aggies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in to Locked On Aggies. I'm your host, Andrew Stefaniak. Thanks for making Locked On Aggies your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. So today I want to talk about a handful of players, and these are not transfers. These are players that were on the roster last season that I think this offseason impacts the most. I have an interesting topic for segment 3. I've had some folks commenting concerned about the lack of a fullback, and I did a little bit of research on Coach Klein's offense, and we're going to talk about that and kind of the concern and the lack of concern there. We'll have that discussion at the tail end of today's show. But the first player I want to start with is DJ Hicks. And I think he is the prime example of what I'm trying to talk about here. But, DJ Hicks is a player who, one of the most talented players in his recruiting class, but you didn't see him on the field a ton last year compared to York, compared to a Chase Besantis. Did he get a few snaps here and there? Yes, he did, but he didn't play a ton. And the reason is that position group last year was stacked. We all know that. I've talked about that time and time again, how good the defensive line was last year, top to bottom. You had 15 guys who could go in and play almost. And we also got to remember that college football, the landscape of college football has changed a lot. Back in the day, before stars, during stars and all that, and when it comes to recruiting, players didn't play as true freshmen a lot. That's more of a modern college football thing, which, has to do partly with how strength and conditioning has changed and everything's there. But, DJ Hicks did not play a ton as a true freshman, which I will be honest, did surprise me a little bit. I did expect him to play a little bit more, in all honesty. I did. I thought that he was going to be out there more than he was, but this offseason, and then I was worried maybe he hits the portal. That was a concern of mine, but he's back, and he's going to be a guy who can be really good with the players you lost. We got to remember how talented he was out of high school, and he got buried because of the talent in the room. So I think this season and this offseason, especially with this new coaching staff, implementing new defense and new stuff there, it's going to be very important for him to take that next step to getting a ton of snaps this season. I'm really high on Hicks and what he's going to do. I think that people get hyped about freshmen, and then if they don't play significant snaps or show some things on the field, people kind of almost forget they exist, even though the kid, once again, was a 5-star, a very highly touted 5-star. So, I think that there's going to be a hype train around DJ Hicks heading into next year. I think he's going to do a lot well. And I wouldn't be surprised, of all the names on this list that I'm going to go over, I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of next season, DJ Hicks is the name that we look back on and we went, man, he had a good year. And but this offseason is going to be important. This is, once again, he's still a young guy. He's got to get bigger, faster, stronger in the weight room, continue to develop there, learning this new defense and what Coach Weigman and Coach Elko want to do on that side of the football. So that's going to be important. But I think DJ Hicks is going to, he's already a man child. I think he's got that going for him, but I think he needs to take that next step when it just flat out comes to, on-field play, understanding of what this defense is going to do. So, but that's my guy right now. I think DJ Hicks is going to have a really good season. The next guy I got here is Bryce Anderson. And Bryce Anderson, I'm going to be honest, is a guy who I was a little disappointed in his play last year. Now, was he awful? No. Was he great? No. He was, he was okay. He had a fine season. But heading into last year, I thought he was going to have a really good year. and he didn't quite have the season I was anticipating. But I think this year, once again, I mean, same kind of argument for Hicks. The difference here is Anderson was on the field, but I think that a new system, sometimes that helps people. Sometimes it helps people the style they play football, different things there. But I think Anderson is a guy who we know how talented he is. And you could see the flashes last year. You could see the flashes. This secondary just as a whole struggled. The secondary was never good at any point. I don't have a better word to describe it than it wasn't good. So I think that, and listen, another thing too, and I talk about having to look over your shoulder, and this is going to be important for a player like Anderson. And there's a lot of positions on the roster like this now. Coach Elko brought in a ton of guys in the secondary, So, at the end of the day, he's going to be looking over his shoulder. He's going to be grinding because he's got to know, listen, if you aren't performing, if you aren't playing good football, we got somebody else now with all the additions he made in the secondary. So Bryce Anderson needs to have a good offseason, and I think a good offseason could lead to him having a better year this year and taking that step, which is going to be important for a player who had a fine year, not a great year. He needs to elevate his game to have a great year this season because there's a ton of talent in Bryce Anderson, and I really want to see it on the football field because I do think he's an NFL player someday. The next guy I got here is Noah Thomas. Now, Noah Thomas struggled to stay on the field last year. That was part of his issue. So, obviously, staying on the field is concern number one for next year. But when he was on the field and when Weigman, Max Johnson, Henderson was getting him the football, he was doing good things. He was scoring touchdowns. With that frame of his, you can do so many things with him. You can get the football to him in so many different ways. You can use him in the red zone. We saw that in the season opener. There are just so many different ways you can use Noah Thomas in an offense. And I think, Coach Klein is kind of looking at him and just like excited, like, I can't wait to find a way to utilize this guy in my offense. So I think Noah Thomas has a really good season. And I think he kind of needs to with where this receiver room's at. Same thing we talked about with Jade Walker. I think he's going to have a good year. But I think he's going to. Like, I'm not saying he doesn't need to work in the offseason, but I feel good about where Jade Walker's at. I think Noah Thomas needs to, hopefully Coach Moffitt and the strength and conditioning coach is getting Noah Thomas right, because that's a huge part of staying on the field. Obviously, freak injuries happen, twisted ankles happen, but these things can be improved and you can stay healthy if you are better conditioned. So want to see that from Noah Thomas. I think he's going to take a step next year. I think he's going to be really good. Next guy I got here is Le'Veon Moss. Le'Veon Moss is a really talented running back. Same thing as Noah Thomas. He struggled a little bit to stay on the field. He was on and off the field a lot during different points in the season. I think if he can stay healthy, he can be a top back in the SEC. Legitimately. I mean, that's how good he is. But he's got to do it. He has got to find a way to stay healthy. Running back, it's hard to do. I mean, receiver, you're not getting tackled as many times as running back's getting tackled. You're not getting hit as many times. I mean, receiver, you can run out of bounds a lot, kind of catch, pass, go down. Running back, you're getting hit a ton. So it's harder to stay healthy. But Le'Veon Moss, I think he can be such a good football player in Coach Klein's offense. And I'm really excited to see that. So Le'Veon Moss is a guy I really want to see take a step this year. Then the next guy I got, and it's kind of a little bit of the same reasons as Bryce Anderson, but is Connor Weigman. I mean, as we've talked about, I'm still riding with Connor Weigman as my guy. A lot of folks in the comments are on the Marshall Reed and Jalen Henderson hype train, which is fine, and I get that. But my take still lies with Connor Weigman. Like I said, with Bryce Anderson, I think he's going to be looking over his shoulder all year, Who's behind me? Who's trying to take over my spot? Same thing with Connor Weigman. I think Connor Weigman has a lot of competition, a lot more competition this year than I kind of thought he would have at certain points last year. So, Connor Weigman's got to be ready to compete for his spot. It's not going to be handed to him. There's going to be a serious competition for this starting quarterback job. So if Weigman's going to win it, he's going to have to fight for it. So this is a big offseason for him because, he's still got to get healthy. He's still got to get himself right. That foot, that ankle, sometimes it's weird to kind of step into that and be able to really play football with an injury like that, be able to really play the game when you're coming off an injury like that. So it's going to be really interesting to see what Connor Weigman's offseason looks like, but he needs to have a good one because if he does not, I think there is a world where one of the other guys could take over that starting quarterback spot. So those are some guys that need to have a big offseason, need to develop their game in the offseason, develop their bodies in the offseason, get ready to go for the 2024 year with the new coaching staff. Because if they don't, I think there's a lot of guys on this roster that could replace them. But I'm excited about every single name I just listed, and I think a lot of good years could be coming up for those guys. A ranking list came out for SEC football coaches. And I think Coach Elko was fairly ranked. I do. But I think there's a whole bunch of guys on this list that he could jump with a solid first year coaching Texas A&M. We'll have a conversation about that list coming up right here on Locked On Aggies. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. Who's going to win the Super Bowl, ladies and gentlemen? Are the Chiefs going to win? Kansas City going to win this game? Or are the 49ers going to win? I'm rolling with the 49ers. I like Debo. I like McCaffrey. I like Brock Purdy. I like his story, Purdy's story, and I think McCaffrey deserves one. I don't want McCaffrey to be one of those players where, man, he was one of the best running backs of all time, and he never got a ring. I think this is an opportunity. So that's where I lie on the Super Bowl. But I've bet against the Chiefs 2 times in the playoffs and gotten burned 2 times. So, that's kind of my thought there. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a dub or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win the Super Bowl, who will win Super Bowl 58, but you can also bet on which players score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. So Saturday Down South ranked all of the SEC coaches. And normally I'd come to y'all with something like this and be griping about it. I'd be griping about it, saying some things about it. But I got to think it's fair where Elko's ranked, in all honesty. Now obviously 16 SEC teams and Elko's ranked 10th. So Saturday Down South had this to write about Elko. One thing I like. In the history of Duke football, no coach had ever recorded more than 13 wins in the first 2 seasons, not even Steve Spurrier. Then Elko showed up, and he won 16 games while bringing college game day to the program for the first time. One thing I don't like, the Clemson win was an unbelievable moment for Elko. It's also his only win versus an AP top 25 team as a head coach. I just think it's hard to hang AP top 25 wins against Elko. He's a Duke, look at the talent he was playing with. And I think he got the most out of what he could get there. And last year, I think could have gone a lot different for Elko if Riley Leonard would have been healthy the whole year. Riley Leonard missed some games, and then there were some games where he was like banged up and in and out of the lineup. And I think the year could have gone differently if Leonard was healthy, maybe another win or 2. But what Elko did at Duke can't be denied. So I think this is a little bit of respect. So let's run through this list bottom to top. 16, and this is part of it too, is like you got Jeff Lebby, the new coach at Mississippi State, at 16. Okay, which is, I guess that's fair, for him. And you got to think about it like this. Elko's a new coach like Levy, and he's number 10. I think that's a fair, respectful spot for a new coach in the SEC. So Levy at 16. Clark Lee at 15. Billy Napier of Florida at 14. Sam Pittman of Arkansas at 13. Shane Beamer of South Carolina at 12. Brett Venables of Oklahoma at 11. Mike Elko at 10. Elijah Drinkwitz at Mizzou at 9. I think that's a little low for what he did last year. Hugh Freeze of Auburn at 8. Josh Heupel of Tennessee at 7. Mark Stoops of Kentucky at 6, which that is high. Steve Sarkisian of Texas at 5. Lane Kiffin at 4. The new Alabama coach, Kalen DeBoer, at 3. Brian Kelly of LSU at 2. And then Kirby Smart of Georgia, of course, at 1. And I'm telling you, there's an Alabama. This is a good article. I'm not knocking this article, but there's an Alabama narrative here. You know how we talked about Kalen DeBoer being the name floating around in the A&M job? But, the issue was he's not going to get hired until after the playoff. And, so, that's why it kind of didn't happen, I think. And obviously he got the Alabama job. I'll tell you this right now. If Kalen DeBoer was Texas A&M's head coach, they'd have him at 8 on this list. They would. That's just the reality. And roster-wise, Alabama is not far off A&M right now after all of the players that they lost in the portal. That's just reality. They're not, Alabama's still probably got a better roster, but not by a huge, wide ocean margin here. So I think that's the one thing. I think he was a little high. Now, if you had him at 7 and been like, well, it's an Alabama bump, that's fine. But 3, you're telling me he's better than some of these other coaches? I just don't believe that. But there's some names here that I think are a little high compared to Coach. Not a little high, but I think that Coach Elko could overtake some of these names after a good first season. Like, I'll give you an example. Hugh Freeze. Hugh Freeze in year 1 lost to New Mexico State, and they were 6-7. I think Elko is going to do much, much better than that. And if Hugh Freeze, let's say Mike Elko has has the same or a better season as Hugh Freeze. Let's say, and he beats Hugh Freeze in Auburn. How can you tell me that he's not ranked ahead of Hugh Freeze heading in the next season? You can't. So that's a name. There's an easy path for Elko to overtake Hugh Freeze on this list. Josh Heupel, there's obviously some stuff going on right now with Tennessee, violation-wise, stuff there. And that's something, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know if they're cheating. I don't know what it is, but Tennessee is definitely in a little bit of trouble right now. But I think Heupel is going to put a lot of faith in a young quarterback. And then you got Mark Stoops at number 6. I don't get the whole Mark Stoops thing. What Mark Stoops did at what he's done at Kentucky has been incredible. He's taken that program from the bottom to middle of the road. But you got to think about it like this. He picked on a down Florida and a down Tennessee for years and years and years as they kind of brought that program to the top. If the SEC West and East was still a thing, with Tennessee where they are now, Georgia being who they are now, Missouri on the up and up, I don't think Kentucky is that good anymore. So I think Stoops is a little high on this list. Now, what he's done at Kentucky is impressive for a program that was absolutely nothing. Nothing. He took it, but I just don't think he's ever going to get it to that next step. So I think he's a little high on this list. And that's another guy. So I think these are the 3 guys that with a good first season, Coach Elko could overtake. I think first of all, I think Eli Drinkwitz is too low on those lists. I would have him ahead of Freeze, Heupel, and Mark Stoops, probably at 6 on this list. But I think those 3 guys for sure are the names that you go 8-4, 9-3 this year. I think you could be looking at Elko as the number 7, a top 7-6 coach in the SEC. So, this rankings list is an interesting one. Pretty good. It's, really good article from Saturday Down South. It was an enjoyable one. And I think it's pretty fair. I think DeBoer's a little high. I think if his first season is a bit of a train wreck, you could see some folks in Alabama freak out and get upset about that. But pretty fair list. Like, I'm going to be honest with you. When I opened that article, I go, Elko is going to be like 14, and I was like, 10, I can live with that. I really can live with that. So I'm not super upset about where they ended up ranking Coach Elko. Now we're going to talk about what I discussed earlier with the bruiser running back, the fullback. What are we going to do there? How does Coach Klein's offense fit into that, and why I'm not as concerned as some other folks are? We'll have that conversation coming up right here on Locked On Aggies. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at Jase Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. That is scary. I can't imagine a loved one of mine, sick, needing some of these life-saving medications, and supply chain issues make it so they can't get them. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, skin infections, and a ton of other things. This stuff can happen to all of us. Visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your first order. So, bruiser running back, halfback, fullback, whatever you want to call it. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not as concerned about this as some. And I want this to be, listen, I do this often. I'll bring something up as a segment 3 because I kind of want to get, I want y'all to know where my head's at. I want to get y'all's thoughts, and then we can have it be, the main part of the show in a couple days, stuff like that. But I want to get my thoughts out there and get your thoughts. So my first thought is it's not a big deal, but caveat to that, I do think there's no reason not to have one on roster. This is college football. You've got 463 guys on your roster, it seems like, and you can have a fullback on the roster. Now, I did go back and watch a lot of Coach Klein's offense from last year and 2 years ago. He uses the tight end Sanat in a very interesting way, where he's sometimes you'll see him lined up almost kind of behind the tackle, and he can do fullback things. He can block for the run game, and he also then runs straight out of that look runs routes out of it. So I think that he used his tight end in that role, which could be why they were so active in the portal going to get some tight ends. You also lost, an important piece and in the portal, and obviously to moving on to the NFL draft from last season. But I think that's why, going to get the tight end from Purdue and Watson. So Miller and Watson was so important. I think, as I've said time and time again, it's really a huge part of his offense. But I think that, and the person commenting this, I think it's Tyler commenting. Let me double check. Let me tell you. Yes, it was Tyler commenting. Shout out Tyler. Every day, or he's always commenting, which I really appreciate you, buddy. But, I'm not as concerned. I'm really not. And partially because I'm a little bit of a believer that it's a thing of the past. And I also believe that Le'Veon Moss is a short yardage back. I'm a believer there. That you can use Le'Veon Moss in that role, and he can pick you up a yard when you need him to. He can pick you up first and goal from the 1 when he needs to. Now, I also am in the camp that there's no reason not to have one. You know what I mean? I'm not saying like, no, we're not going to have one. Like, there's no reason to not have a fullback on the roster or somebody but that's the thing, is you can use other players as a fullback. It doesn't have to be a fullback like we had last year. So, it's an interesting debate. I think you can go lots of ways here. I think Le'Veon Moss can be a bruiser running back. Now, I agree. Having that 230-pound running back is always great and helpful. But I just think Coach Klein's offense, he uses he's either doesn't have a fullback in the game, or he uses the tight end kind of in that position, and he can use that tight end to go out and catch back. I mean, same thing. Basically, the only difference in what he used Sanat to do last year, in my opinion, is the position he was listed as. He's listed as tight end, not a running back, or not a fullback, but usually they list fullbacks as running backs. So he's listed as a tight end, not a running back. That's the only difference. I mean, if it's something y'all are really concerned about, like, I understand that. I do. And as I said, there's no reason not to have one on roster. There's no reason to not have a guy on roster. I just think that they are planning to use a different player for that than like, someone listed as a fullback. I think that you're going to see a fullback type player, but it's going to be potentially a tight end. I mean, so what I'm saying is go type in Sanat, his tight end from Kansas State. Go watch his highlights, and then you'll see what I'm talking about, where he lines up. He uses that a ton. He's got, like I said, a couple steps behind the tackle, just barely in the backfield. I saw him block out of it, and I saw him go out and catch touchdowns and passes out of it. So go watch those highlight tapes on him, and see if it makes you feel any better. I talked about Tyler's comment. I've seen tons of people comment about, fullback concerns. So let me know y'all's thoughts there. I'm not as concerned as some on this topic, but I can see why it is concerning. And I'm with you. There's no reason not to have a guy like that on roster. But I do think it's kind of just a position where, you might use a different title for that role. So that's kind of my thoughts there. Let me know y'all's thoughts on this. I'm serious. I want to have a back and forth conversation on this topic. So in the comments, if this is a concern for you, let me know why, and let's discuss, and then we can have like a mailbag segment of it, to start the show at some point, in the next couple days or two, next week maybe. So let me know y'all's thoughts on that. I'm very curious to hear them. Two things. We're going to have a huge conversation on NIL. Somebody commented the other day and said, Andrew, everyone always says the Texas A&M has the best NIL. Well, what does that mean? How do we know that? I did a little bit of research, and I found some interesting things, but I wanted to do a little bit more research before I kind of have a show surrounded around it. So that'll be coming soon. That'll be a lot of fun. I'm also going to try and get a couple interviews from the NIL collective of Texas A&M and try and figure out some things there. So a fun show coming up when that happens, hopefully next week, potentially the following week, depending on when I can get in contact with some folks. So yeah, that's my thought there. But that's going to do it for today's episode, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, please do so. It really does help the show. If you're listening on a podcast platform, hit the review button, leave 5 stars. That helps a ton as well. I really appreciate y'all being here every single day, commenting every single day. It means a lot and really helps the show grow. Wouldn't be here without y'all, and I really do appreciate it. Everybody have a great rest of your day today, and we will see you tomorrow.